In 1400, Moscow was still a compact wooden city gathered around the pale stone walls of the Kremlin. Yet its ambitions were already larger than its streets. Traders crossed the Moskva River with furs and grain, monks copied sacred texts, bells carried across frozen roofs, and princes watched neighboring lands with hunger. The city had survived fires, raids, dynastic rivalries, and the pressure of Mongol rule, but it was becoming the center around which northeastern Rus could unite. Under Vasily I, Moscow strengthened its influence through diplomacy and war. While monasteries beyond the walls became spiritual and economic centers, residents lived in timber houses beside muddy lanes, where every blaze threatened entire districts. During the 15th century, civil conflict divided the ruling family, but each crisis ultimately concentrated greater authority in Moscow. When Ivan III took power in 1462, the transformation accelerated. He expanded Muscovite territory, challenged the Golden Horde, and presented himself as ruler of a rising state in 1480. The confrontation on the Ugra River ended Moscow's payment of tribute. Italian architects then rebuilt the Kremlin with red brick walls, towers, palaces, and cathedrals by 1500. The skyline had become a declaration in stone. Moscow was no longer merely a fortified town. It was becoming the political and spiritual core of a unified realm. The 16th century opened with Moscow at the center of expansion. Under Vasily III, more territories were absorbed. And under Ivan IV, remembered as Ivan the Terrible, the city witnessed the creation of the Russian Tsardom. His coronation in 1547 raised the ruler from Grand Prince to Tsar, giving Moscow an imperial language shaped by Byzantine and Orthodox traditions. That same year, fire and rebellion exposed the danger within its crowded wooden neighborhoods. Victories over Kazan and Astrakhan widened the state, and St. Basil's Cathedral rose beside Red Square. Yet triumph existed beside terror. Ivan's Oprichnina brought confiscation, executions, fear, and instability, while prolonged wars exhausted the country. After his dynasty collapsed, Moscow entered the time of troubles. Famine, pretenders, foreign intervention, and civil conflict brought the city close to ruin. Polish forces occupied the Kremlin, but in 1612, a volunteer army led by Kuzma Minin and Prince Dmitry Pozharsky helped drive them out. 1 year later, Mikhail Romanov was chosen as Tsar, beginning a dynasty that would rule for more than 3 centuries. Under the early Romanovs, markets, workshops, churches, and court life recovered. Foreign merchants arrived. Craftsmen filled revived workshops, and neighborhoods spread beyond the old defensive rings by the late 17th century. Peter the Great viewed old Moscow with both attachment and frustration. He knew its palaces and intrigues, but believed Russia needed a new window onto Europe. After founding St. Petersburg on the Baltic, he shifted the capital there, and in 1712, Moscow lost its position as the main seat of government. The change reduced its political dominance without destroying its importance. Moscow remained the place of coronations. Noble estates, religious authority, commerce, and national memory. Aristocrats built mansions, merchants financed churches, and Moscow developed a character distinct from the imperial capital in the north. During the 18th century, stone buildings, planned squares, hospitals, and institutions changed its streets. Moscow University was founded in 1755, strengthening the city as a center of scholarship. Then came the catastrophe of 1812. Napoleon entered Moscow after the Battle of Borodino, expecting occupation of the ancient city to force Russia into surrender. Instead, Moscow was largely abandoned. Fires spread across its wooden districts, supplies disappeared, and the conquerors found themselves holding a burned and empty prize. Napoleon waited for peace that never came, then began the disastrous retreat. Moscow rose again through Reconstruction. Wider streets, neoclassical buildings, gardens, and ring roads reshaped the landscape. The rebuilt city soon became a center of literature, music, art, debate, trade, and industry. During the 19th century, Moscow expanded beyond the scale of its old walls. Railways connected it with St. Petersburg, the Volga region, the Black Sea, and the Russian interior. Textile mills and engineering works drew laborers from the countryside. Merchants accumulated fortunes. And crowded districts grew beside grand boulevards and private mansions. The contrast between wealth and poverty became impossible to ignore. Reformers discussed education, law, and social justice. Revolutionaries organized in secrecy, and cultural institutions gained international stature. The Bolshoi Theater embodied imperial spectacle. The Tretyakov collection celebrated Russian art. And markets gave daily Moscow a restless rhythm. By the early 20th century, electric lights, trams, telephones, and modern industry had altered urban life, but political tension intensified. The revolution of 1905 brought strikes, barricades, demonstrations, and armed clashes, revealing Moscow as a major arena of opposition to autocracy. The First World War strained food, factories, transport, and morale. Then the revolutions of 1917 destroyed the imperial order. Fierce fighting erupted between Bolshevik forces and their opponents. Artillery damaged historic buildings, and control became essential to the new regime in March 1918. The Bolshevik government moved the capital from Petrograd back to Moscow. Once again, the Kremlin became the center of national power. But royal emblems now stood beside red flags, and former palaces became offices of revolution. The Soviet decades changed Moscow more radically than any earlier period. After civil war, hunger, and disruption, the city became the administrative heart of a vast union. Planners imagined a capital displaying industrial progress and ideological certainty. Old neighborhoods were demolished. Avenues widened, apartment blocks multiplied. And immense government buildings altered the skyline. Religious institutions suffered heavily. Churches and monasteries were closed, repurposed, or destroyed, including the original Cathedral of Christ, the Savior, in 1931. The Moscow Metro opened in 1935, not merely as transportation, but as an underground palace for ordinary citizens. Marble halls, mosaics, and chandeliers turned travel into political theater above ground. Stalinist architecture emphasized scale and authority, while purges, arrests, and forced confessions created a hidden geography of fear. In 1941, Nazi Germany approached Moscow. Factories were evacuated, defenses were built, and residents prepared for siege. The Battle of Moscow stopped the German advance and symbolized resistance. After victory, Reconstruction resumed. The Seven Sisters skyscrapers rose across the capital. New housing districts stretched outward, and the metro expanded beneath them. Under Khrushchev, standardized apartment blocks gave millions of families private living space. Moscow later staged Cold War ceremonies, military parades, ballet, cinema, and space-age pride. The 1980 Olympic Games projected modern confidence. Although shortages, bureaucracy, pollution, and stagnation remained behind the spectacle in the late 1980s. Reforms introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev loosened censorship and opened public discussion. Moscow filled with meetings, new newspapers, demands for democracy, and anxiety about decline. In August 1991, hardline officials attempted a coup. Tanks entered the city. Crowds gathered around the Russian White House, and Boris Yeltsin climbed onto an armored vehicle to condemn the takeover. The coup failed, and by the end of the year, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. Moscow became the capital of the Russian Federation, but the transition brought shock. Industries fractured, prices surged, fortunes appeared quickly, and kiosks, advertisements, banks, luxury cars, and inequality transformed the streets. In October 1993, a constitutional confrontation ended with tanks firing on the Parliament building, proving that the new political order was still being decided through force. Religious landmarks were restored, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior was rebuilt, and international architecture entered the skyline during the early 21st century. Roads, offices, parks, shopping centers, and residential towers expanded. Moscow City introduced glass skyscrapers beside older rings of stone and concrete. The metro reached distant districts. Digital services changed transportation. Yet attacks, protests, security measures, and restrictions on opposition also marked recent history. By 2026, Moscow stands as a metropolis of more than 13 million residents, layered with more than 6 centuries of visible transformation. Medieval cathedrals stand beside Stalinist towers. Soviet mosaics guide commuters beneath skyscrapers. And the Moskva River curves through districts shaped by different eras. Red Square remains the nation's symbolic stage. The Kremlin remains the seat of state power. While museums, universities, studios, markets, and neighborhoods reveal a life broader than official ceremony. Moscow in 2026 is also shaped by the pressures surrounding Russia's war against Ukraine. International sanctions, tightened political control, security concerns, and competing interpretations of history. For residents, the past lives in courtyards. Photographs, metro stations, rebuilt churches, renamed streets and memorials, and artificial reconstruction can restore vanished walls, wooden markets, snow-covered lanes, imperial mansions, revolutionary barricades, Soviet construction sites, and glass towers. But the deeper story lies in continuity. Every generation adapted the same strategic landscape to a new vision of power, identity, and belonging. From the fortified capital of 1400 to the immense urban center of 2026, Moscow changed beyond recognition, yet its central role endured. It remained the place where Russia most visibly imagined what it had been, what it had become, and what it still hoped, or feared it might be.